All right. Welcome, James. Welcome. You are the very first person to be on the Universal Man interview series. How's that feel?
It feels absolutely fantastic. Huge honor to be here. I'm normally a very sarcastic person, but I won't be. I'll restrain myself in this instance. Thank you, Mark.
Yes. No, so glad to have you here. I figured it'd be great to start with you because you've been following along with the project for a while now. You were, part of the vanguard for a fair bit. And then what happened? I guess things just got too good and you felt like you didn't need help and you went off and started, your own thing. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, I was part of the vanguard when I think the very first day when you first announced it, I was like, that's the type of thing I want to be a part of. But I wasn't entirely sure why. It wasn't really to assist me in getting over, we'll say, past addictions, because I was already past that at that point. But it was more, I was just intrigued by that energy because it seemed to be very countercultural. And what the modern energy of the time is, we'll say, opposed to the morals of the vanguard. So I aligned with them. So I hung out for a bit, and then I decided, yeah, I've exposed myself to this community. I made some very good friends in that community, and so I thought I'd go and expand myself into the world of just a young budding seedling man, and now I've expanded and tried to do my own things.
That's awesome. Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, James is now helping me with Universal Man. I really liked his energy. I saw him, just kind of his attitude toward things, and he's got some really interesting thoughts. Like you're a deep thinker. You like to look at the classics too. Who are your biggest influences, would you say, that you draw upon?
Currently, it has to be Carl Jung. It must be.
Yeah.
I've just finished a lecture series on YouTube going through Carl Jung's Ion, which is one of his last great works. It started off line by line, and then we realized it would literally take us 2 years to finish this book. But so we've just finished it now, having done chapter by chapter. So definitely I'm caught up into that weird, wonderful world. And then as well, Nietzsche would be in there as well for many different paradoxical reasons. And even though I've read his works, I still don't think I understand what he's saying in any crystallized form. So it's kind of like a dance I'm doing with these works where I'm interested in the deep stuff, as you said, because that's always fun. But then at the same time, they are self-improvement things. They're the most grounded-based self-improvement. So I think it stacks up on that strata of self-improvement on many, many different levels.
That's really cool. Yeah, like I've always been hesitant to dive into other people's stuff just because I've always wanted to think for myself. And I found that sometimes, especially when I'm in a highly creative mode, and that's kind of what I'm sort of coming out of and going back into is, when I was working on the Reforged Man course, it's just like, all right, I've consumed enough information. I've read, hundreds of books since I started my self-development journey. And I was like, all right, no more input. Let's just synthesize everything we've got and put it out. But since, in particular, Jordan Peterson has kind of really stormed onto the scene, and he has popularized a lot of the Jung and Nietzsche sort of stuff. It's inspired me to go check it out, but I haven't actually gotten around to it. So, which is part of the reason why I think it would be great to have you on, since you have done such deep digging into it. And you mentioned that there is potentially some crossover between the things that they talk about and the things that I talk about, and
100%.
Kind of what I always, what I find sometimes is that I end up reinventing the wheel because I haven't spent enough time studying people's works and be like, they already figured this out. They already solved that. And so I come up with my own thing, and then it ends up being like something else. But sometimes there's value in that, because if you come up maybe you reach the same peak, but if you come up from a different side of the mountain, you pick up a few different things. You see a new perspective. So I guess my goal in this conversation is to sort of see where I mesh with the classical thinkers, and maybe where I'm lacking, and maybe where I can learn something. Because with this interview series, I pretty much want to make it like my own learning discovery process and pretty much just share it with everybody else. So how's that sound? Most guys struggle to quit porn because they aren't building the right habits to replace porn. If you want to learn the simple habit replacement system I've used to help thousands of men quit porn and develop self-mastery, then click the link in the description below and download my free Reboot Regimen guide.
Yeah, no, that's a really cool idea. I mean, you mentioned Jordan Peterson, and obviously that's where my interest first began,
Mm,
obviously. And the way I see him is a figure of order. I think obviously he's got his metaphor of order and chaos,
right.
but he's a figure of order coming forth into a chaotic world, and he's trying to restore the old guard in a way to try and come up with, are there facts about reality? And he's contrasted himself against that postmodernist lens which says no, and he's saying yes. So I found that really interesting. And it's like,
Mm,
okay, he's presupposing that there are laws to the way your mind, your psyche, the world works. And
hmm
so if those laws exist, then they will exist on multiple levels at the same time. And say
mm,
characters like you, who's not a depth psychologist, who's not a philosopher in the academic sense, if you're going around looking for truth as you've done, there's a high chance that if you do it properly enough and with enough integrity, you're going to drill down into the strata of truth, and you're going to hit something and water's going to come up. And it'll
yeah.
be at like a lower level of resolution because you won't have, say, the academic nomenclature with which to describe it, but it will be a reflection of what's going on. And you know
Right.
that's the case because it works, and
Right.
it's worked for you. You've healed, we'll say. You've been a cleric for thousands of men. So it's like there must
Right.
be something to what you're doing. So yeah, and I think I see parallels in Jungian psychology, which adds an extra dimension of your stuff being based.
Cool, cool. Well, that sounds awesome. Yeah, it's like the way I've always kind of described myself, at least to myself, is that I'm a psychological spelunker. You know, like spelunking is like cave exploring. It's like, you know, I dive down into like the darkest parts of myself that I can. I kind of bump around and get lost, and usually have some sort of mental breakdown or something. But I map my journey, and you know, you get a feel for the edges of the room. You know, what parts are sharp, what parts will burn you, where the traps are at, and then where the parts that are actually pretty good are. And eventually, you know, kind of like a blind person who, you know, can navigate their home perfectly. It's like you spend enough time in those areas, you realize the shape of things, and then you can kind of, you know, do your best to describe it to other people. And that's kind of that's I guess the process that you're talking about, delving through the strata. I just see it as kind of like walking through the unknown until it becomes known, pretty much.
Yeah, because otherwise you're lost. And I remember
Right.
you put out a video, I don't know how many years ago now, it must have been like 6 years or so, and you were talking to your, I think it was fiance at the time, now your wife,
Mm.
about your struggles with pornography and how it basically left you lost, and you'd come up with a situation in which your relationship appeared at the very least to be in serious danger. So it's very uncomfortable, I suppose, to go out confronting all of this stuff, looking for truth, but at the same time you need to do it. And I guess you
Right.
were put in that situation where you needed to, where most of the time, we'll take the context of pornography because it's relevant,
Right.
guys don't feel like they need to, because it's
Mm.
like, well, one more time, one more time, one more time. It's not going to destroy me. But you had that
Right.
necessity. So the truth is uncomfortable to go towards, but you need it or else you will die. Something like that.
Well, as long as I would say that's the truth, as long as you're willing to be non-negotiable on certain aspects of who you want to be. Because it's like, you know, I didn't need to do it. I could have just continued on the porn path, but then a part of me that was even more important would have had to die. And I think that's kind of the thing is like, you know, what are the things that you're going to draw the line in the sand around, you know, what you value? You know, there's going to be some things that are going to be worth fighting for. Whereas like, it wasn't like at a certain point you give up enough of those integral pieces of who you want to be, and life actually stops being worth anything. It stops being worth living. And so it's like, you know, I recognize that, yeah, I didn't have to do this, but then, you know, what's the point of any of this? If I'm going to allow myself to devolve into something I loathe, you know, that's hell on earth pretty much.
Yeah, that's definitely the definition of hell. Not good to go down that road, man.
Yeah. So, all right, let's start the conversation here, because this is the part that I'm interested in terms of Jung in particular. Describe to me like what the anima is. All right, I'm going to give you my impression of what the anima is, and you can tell me if that's accurate or not. And I want to learn more about it. So the anima, I think it's like a man's perception of femininity. It's like his idealized feminine in a sense. And it's kind of like, you know, every time you look at a woman, you compare her to your anima, basically. It's like she's like the anima would be like your idealized woman. It's like the measuring stick. And the more that a woman conforms to this measuring stick or matches the template here, the more attracted to her you are on various different levels. And so when I first heard this concept, it was like very striking to me, because what it basically said was that a woman is not attractive in and of herself. It's your perception of her that determines whether you're attracted to her. And that was really interesting to me, because at the same time I was also coming to the realization, it's like, all right, you know, say you got God. Maybe you don't. I don't know. But we all have a perception of God. And that's all we ever get to interact with God through, whether he exists or not. It's like you can only know your perception. In the same way, you can only know your perception of a woman. And the problem, I guess, would be that, particularly around porn, is like porn distorts the anima very much so. And it would cause, it's almost like that thing that some sort of like consumption by it, or like it either consumes the woman to the point where you can't see her anymore. You can only see how, you know, hot she is, how much she measures up to this thing. And which ultimately I think then leads to having yourself consumed by, like, it's like when you are a victim to it, that's the problem. And like, I guess it's interesting too to look at it from like the red pill lens of like why I always say that like you need to have at least access to dominance energy as a man, and you need to know how to wield it consciously, because if you cannot be dominant in yourself, well, then you're actually always going to end up a slave to your sexuality, because you will always end up submissive to your own anima, and therefore become, you know, a porn addict, sex addict, or just you know, horribly resentful. So I don't know, go off of that.
Yeah, no, that sounded pretty close, actually. There's truth there, but I think we can expand on it a little bit more. So I'm actually going to use a metaphor I've used recently in the Ion lectures, just because it's fresh in my mind. So reality as you perceive it is a product of the psyche, because you need to have a psyche, like an observer through which to look at the world, right? And everything you do has to pass through that particular lens. So you can say that the world is made out of atoms, and that's correct, because it is made out of atoms. That's undeniable. But it's also made out of other things. So you can take the atom level, and then you can go up and make cells, for example. Are there cells, or are they just atoms? Well, there's both. They're like reflections of each other.
Sure.
Then you go up and you make the person, which would be another dynamic. Now, in nature, in the psyche, we see human beings, I know this is so politically incorrect to say, never mind, as man and as woman. So those cells can be, you know, humans can be man and they can be woman. But then man can also be abstracted higher, and this is where the modern man has serious problems, into spiritual man, and woman can be abstracted into spiritual woman. And that spiritual plane is the domain in which stories play out. So if you go and you read a great piece of classic literature, or indeed any literature, and you see from a man's perspective a woman, that's a representation of the anima. And vice versa, from a woman's perspective, when she comes across a man, that's the animus. So in a man's psyche, he's got this perception of women as this autonomous, abstracted character called the anima, and there's vice versa in a woman. So in Jung's model of the psyche, there are two different energies that are at play with each other. And in mythological terms, this is called logos and eros. You know, logos is a word which is being thrown around a lot now. It's quite a culturally popular term on certain circles of the internet. But what that basically means is the masculine, rational component of the mind. Then on the other side, you've got the more soft, yielding, feminine, motherly type of energy. And a man's psyche, when he goes through life, and this thing is abundantly clear to everybody, generally speaking, is like logos dominated. They're attracted to objects. They're rational creatures. They're problem solvers. Whereas a woman is more nurturing. She's more eros focused. She's more in touch with her feelings, things like that. But a man in his head has that anima capability. So he's got a piece of the feminine in his mind. Now, a man's relationship to his anima, because you can think of the anima as actually being a separate character in your head. You can be a magician about it if you want to and summon it before yourself, as characters have done for hundreds of years. But you need to have a good dialogue with your anima, because the anima informs your relationship with the feminine. When you come across a woman, what happens is your anima gets essentially activated, if you want to think about it mechanically, and she'll project all kinds of ideals onto that woman. And equally, when you try and suppress your emotions, you're getting in touch with your anima. So unless you have a strong dialogue between the two of you, you won't be a whole man. So this actually runs contrary to a lot of what the red pill type characters like to say, which is, in fact, they do like to denigrate Carl Jung an awful lot. And they say, men are men and you need to be masculine men. But what they don't understand is men also have that feminine component that they need to get in touch with, which is the emotions, the eros, love, feelings. And once they do that, they can then go and become a more masculine man. And a perfect example of this, which everyone will know, is Elliot Hulse. If you contrast him with, say, the rest of the standard manosphere, he's more masculine, but at the same time, he's more feminine. And he talks about that all the time. He's got a good dialogue with his emotions. He's in his body. He's grounded. He's powerful. And that gives him a more sort of masculine essence. But in the context of pornography, that's a twisted relationship with your anima. And you know that this is the case because it's not what you deem to be the optimal mode of being. Something like that. So you actually project your fantasies onto these characters so that your sexuality becomes twisted in multiple pathological domains, not only because they're fake, not only because they don't like you, not only because it's devoid of emotion, it's on a screen, it's completely and utterly unnatural. You can get it whenever you want. There's loads of dodgy components. So your emotions when it comes to approaching sexuality and the feminine starts falling apart. It starts decaying. It gets pathologized. So you can imagine that, say, say the Virgin Mary, or we'll say Eve, we'll take them purely as fictional characters for the time being, though they may not have been. Those are good women, and you would imagine they have a good sexuality. There's a good nature to them. But when you pathologize it into porn, you actually fall into a myth involving an anima, and this is the succubus, or it's the sirens from Homer's Odyssey.
Right.
It's that feminine who all she does is she comes up to you, she grabs hold of you. You think it's you in control when you go and you watch porn. No. You're not the one choosing.
Right.
Something else is making you do it. That's the anima grabbing you, going, "Give me your life force, hero. Give me your life force. Give me your life force." And then you go and you engage in twisted, pathological, digital sex with the anima, fueling her, making her more powerful. And you know she's more powerful because you can't pull away from it. You keep falling underneath her spell, her magic spell. She comes to you when you're in a drifting unconscious state. You're not grounded. That's what that means. You're unconscious, which is the realm where the anima lives, and she will force you and sap out your heroic life energy. So that's a brief primer to the anima anyway.
Okay. Yeah, no, that thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's a couple of things there. One, I want to come back to this, is the idea of masculine versus like feminine energy, because I think that's an important piece I want to look at. But then, crap, there's another piece right there too. I lost it. All right, so we'll just start there. So this is one of the things I think causes a lot of problems, is that there's this common thread, this common idea that there is more masculine energy and there's more feminine energy, and that, like, for example, like the whole concept of you need, as a man, you either should or shouldn't get in touch with your feminine side. And I've always been of the, at least I've spoken primarily of the idea that you don't have a feminine side, you're just a man. But then I also see the value in this perspective. So here's kind of the conclusion, or the perspective that I have on it now, is that to call emotions, or to claim emotions to be in the realm of femininity, I don't think is fair. I think men can be just as emotive as women without arguing that that's feminine. And I would say that women can also be supremely rational, logical, object-oriented. Now, I do think, obviously, there is a tendency toward one toward the other, but what I think it's more about is really kind of hormones. And then because of the hormones, the kinds of relationships that are then most productive within ourselves. So, for example, if you have a high testosterone brain, okay, you have a high testosterone system, then I believe that actually the most useful mental framework is a dominance-focused framework. And to actually view your emotions then as you could view it as like a feminine part of yourself that needs to be masculinely led, or you can look at it as just like you know, in the same way as that a military operates. You have a chain of command. That if there isn't dominance within a testosterone-based system, then basically the emotions, when they get out of control, they get insanely ugly, and they become very bad. And you know, you got porn addiction, and you know, you got violence. Usually, it's pretty much like sexual like poor sexual action or poor physical action, some kind of crime, pretty much. But I would say that for women, there is a bit of a difference because they're not a high testosterone system. They're more of an estrogen-based system, which is, you know, linked all up with oxytocin and whatnot, that they actually interact with themselves most optimally in a more relational, like familial sort of, you know, what would we call it? Affectionate manner, maybe. And it's like, it's not that women are more emotive. I just think that they probably get along in themselves when they're friendlier with their emotions. I think men get along better in themselves when they're more dominant with their emotions. And I think it leads to I think then that perception that emotions then are feminine and, you know, toughness or logical or whatever, logical reasoning and stuff is masculine. But I think really it's more of a matter of pragmatism. What's most effective in you? It's like, and I think this is a lot of what we see today in men's struggle, is that they're trying to adopt a feminine mode of being to manage themselves, and they're trying to be so in touch with their emotions and be so precious with their feelings. And ultimately, I think what that leads to is weak men, is nice guys, is soy boys, is this whole situation where we've got a bunch of guys who are not being looked at as women, and they're not being successful in the world because they don't know how to lead their emotions well. And then alternatively, it's kind of like the opposite has happened to women. They've been told that they need to act more like men, and because of that, they've been, I think, rejecting much of their softer, more nurturing elements because they've been taught that that's bad and that makes them weak for some reason. And then they end up 35 and single without kids, having a bit like, you know, having a crisis. So I don't know. That's big generalizations that I threw out there. But what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think so. Men adopting feminine toolkits and women adopting masculine toolkits, it doesn't work. Because, or it doesn't work in the normal sense because they're not actually adopting it properly. So even if their hypothesis was correct, I can start acting more like a woman.
I would just say you don't actually have the tools. I would just say you don't actually have the neurochemical makeup to make that work. In the same way that like a guy can't do a bodybuilding program built for people who are on steroids and get the same kind of results. In fact, he probably will hurt himself because a guy on steroids, he can recover at a much faster rate. So he can do insane volume, you know, a very high consistency. And it's kind of like, you know, a woman trying to do that is the same, like trying to operate in a masculine mode of being is the same sort of thing. And I don't know what analogy would be for the other way, but I think you get my point.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps it's an issue of nomenclature, actually, because so the unconscious is personified as feminine. I think Jordan Peterson was taken to task for this, actually, when he was like, well, why are you calling the unconscious feminine and the feminine chaos? And he didn't answer the question very well. He's like, well, it's just always been like that, man. There is a reason for it. And it's like, where do human beings come from? What's our earliest possible psychic memory? And it's like the mother's womb.
Right.
And that's when we were unconscious. So when we look into the unconscious from whence we came, you might say, that's always personified as feminine and always has in myths.
The unconscious must always be penetrated. And I mean, even just like the physical symbolism, like the vagina is far more complex and, you know, many different layers and folds to it than, you know, the phallic, you know, penis or whatever. It's just like symbolically it just matches up.
yes it does, which is incredibly strange.
Right.
So you can imagine the unconscious as being the realm of emotions, because emotions aren't necessarily conscious. So when people approach men and they say you need to cry more, what they're saying is you need to try and fake crying more, because you don't get to decide when to cry. You need to have a good relationship with your unconscious. So the point of a masculine man adopting a feminine or becoming more feminine, we'll say, engaging with that anima component, is to integrate what's in the unconscious properly. So in other words, when he comes up against a problem and things aren't going the way he wants to do, this is literally like Jungian psychology in its simplest possible practical terms. You go through life and you watch yourself incredibly carefully, and when things don't go the way that you want them to, you think to yourself, what happened there? So say, for example, you lash out at somebody, or you come across somebody who you instantly hate and detest. If you pull that apart, that you'll come to realize that it's probably a projection from you because you feel insecure. And that Jung would say that that is the shadow. And when it's resulting in a man anyway, when it's resulting more in a overly emotional tendency or a sexually pathological tendency, that's a poorly integrated anima. So when I'm saying that men, not me, I'm not going to take credit for this, when Jung is saying that men need to become more feminine, that's inflammatory language in our current context. What he means is you need to have a proper dialogue with the feminine unconscious so that the emotions, the eros, can serve you on your hero's journey.
Okay. So yeah, so the way I would describe that in my sort of system, you know, I've set up in the Reforged Man, really detailed it there, is, you know, we got the primal self and the terminal self. Terminal self being, you know, the more rational intellectual aspect, and the primal self being the more emotive. Is that really it's a matter of service. It's a service through leadership. Basically, it's like, you know, if someone said, like, if I was going to tell someone that they needed to cry more, the way that I would mean that is that you need to actually be in touch with your primal self. You're what, you know, maybe you could lump the anima in there and all your other emotions, in the sense that you need to understand what it wants, what it feels, and this deep knowing about the things that you want and feel, it allows you to do a few different things. One, it allows you to analyze, well, how much bullshit's in there? Because a lot of times we got feelings that have no basis in reality, and they're actually bad feelings. You can have bad feelings. I wouldn't say that, like, the experience of a feeling could ever be bad. It's like, you know, feelings, they're going to feel as they feel, but they can hold untruths. Like, for example, you know, you could have a craving that says, I want to watch porn, when in reality, you know that you don't actually want to, because it's only going to bring you ultimately pain and suffering, and it doesn't represent your morals and that sort of thing. So it's like, you can see that for the lie that it is, and you need to have the relationship enough to be able to listen to it, be able to translate it, be able to feel it, and then respond to it. And it's like, as far as I can tell, the best mode of being you can enter into, maybe not the best, I would say there's one layer higher than this, but the way you get to that higher level is to have a relationship between this terminal self and primal self, where the terminal self, it takes this, especially, at least in a man, I'm still working out exactly how it looks in a woman, is that the man's terminal self must take a dominant leadership, service-oriented role toward the primal self, meaning that it must essentially dominate, be final say, but it must love and serve the primal self. So it's basically like you serve your emotions, but not as the hedonists do. As the hedonists, they don't actually serve their emotions. They are just a slave to their emotions, a slave to their compulsions and impulses. What I'm saying is, like, a lot of times the best way that you can serve your emotional self, the thing, like, if by serving meaning make things as good for your emotional self as possible, is to often tell yourself no and to face suffering and pain. That's what discipline is. It's to hurt your current emotional self so that your emotional self will actually be happier in the future. And so that's the way that I see it kind of breaking down. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on, which is, you know, interesting. Is how, if, you know, you see this thing in Jungian psychology, and then you see it in your, and you're like, okay, that matches up and that's correct. So what I would do is I would take terminal self and I would use logos. You can say multiple things. I would say largely masculine consciousness, logos factor. You deciding with the sword of your will to go and do something. It might not be, you know, great, powerful Mars, Aries energy, if you want to use that type of language. It might be softer. You don't have to go on a crusade. But
Sure.
if you consciously decide to do something. Now, when you take pornography, I think you've dropped the key there for what it's worth. And it's like, well, are you deciding to go watch porn? If so, like, I don't know why anyone would be interested in your videos. They wouldn't care. Oh, yes, I'm bored now. I'm going to go watch pornography. It's like, no, you're not. I highly doubt it's you. And this is where things get really creepy. It's like, okay, what's pulling you there?
Right.
And you said primal mind because of, say, an evolutionary mismatch or a poor management of energy and things like that, which is, I think, completely correct. But I would personify the primal mind as the demon of the unconscious. And the demon of the unconscious could also be something of service. It doesn't have to be a demon. The unconscious is like a shapeshifter. It can take many forms. It could be a beautiful woman who can supplement your masculine consciousness. You can get in touch with your emotions and get grounded and understand, because when a man is grounded, then he can do anything. I think that's what alpha means. It's just a grounded man, when he speaks with conviction and being tender at the same time as well. So he's not an absolute tyrant. That by bringing the primal mind along with you, you're the one in control of it. So it's not the anima tapping you on the shoulder and sapping your life force. She's tapping you on the shoulder. You're turning around, grabbing her and using her energy, her raw eros energy, to go and do what you want to do with it, which I think is how sexual transmutation works as well. We're not sure on a mechanism on that, but I think it's the same thing. You're turning that energy which wants its own direction, and you're pushing it in your own.
Right. And so, like, that's why I think relationship here is key. You can't interact with your emotions as if, like, I think the tendency for very, logos dominated, terminal mind dominant kind of guys, which I think is a lot of guys, is to view your emotions as something that you can engage in a transactional relationship with, that you can treat kind of like a computer. And, like, I guess anything you can model like that, but I think a much more effective model that better outlines the terms of the game is to view it as actually a person, in the sense that, like, it's got its own motivations and feelings and desires, and if you disrespect it, then that's going to cause problems. That's why I think, you're talking about, like, it's this, primal self, or the shadow, or the, the unconscious mind taking over when you act out or something. And I think that's true, but why does that happen? And I think the reason that it happens is that because there's a disconnect between ourselves. It's like, and that's essentially the solution that I offer in Reforged Man. That's where I get the word reforged, is that you actually have to build the connection between these things. Because what I think most of us engage in when we're behaving poorly is that we have this pendulum swing where each side ends up repressing the other. So we'll go through a period where, we'll be logos dominated, or our rational mind will suppress all our emotions, and we try and be perfect and really good, and it works for a little while, but all that energy, all that unconscious stuff, it's not gone. it's just there. And if it doesn't like what you're doing, and it doesn't like the way that you're treating it, and you're completely ignoring it, well, then eventually it's just kind of like you keep shoveling garbage into the closet, and I can't fit anymore, and it's just gonna come all out. And it's not even necessarily all bad, it's just uncontrolled, because the primal self, it can't think rationally. It doesn't have literally the machinery in it. It's like all limbic system. It's about as smart as, like, a dog, if that. And, like, it needs to be trained. It needs, like, it wants to run wild. That's what it's designed to do. That's the thing that puts us into flow states, into trance states. Whenever you're kind of absorbed in something, that's your limbic system, firing. And yeah, there's some harmony probably with the cortex and whatnot going on there, but, like, your limbic system wants to run. And so you just chain it up till it can't run. Eventually, it's just going to freak out and break the chain and go crazy. I think the better way to do it is learn how to figure out what are those primal needs, what are the emotions, and then construct a fenced-in area. That's really the job of the terminal self, I believe, is to figure out, all right, where can you run free? Where can you go and do this stuff, and where are the hard lines? And that's where you need to have rational thinking capabilities. That's where you need the cortex. And, like, that's what sexual transmutation is you say, all right, you can't run over here. And I know you really want to. And maybe you're going to stand at the fence and just bark and try and get over there for a while. But eventually you're going to get bored, and you're going to turn around and you're going to look at all this other area that we've got open up for you to run around in. It's kind of like a rewiring of the motivational systems of our dopamine or serotonin hierarchies that we care about and all that kind of shit. That's what sexual transmutation is. It's saying, all right, you can't run over there, but you can run over here. And as soon as you do that, well, it's like you start tapping into the ability to pursue life and the things that you actually care about with the same sort of vigor that maybe you only used to be able to pour into video games and porn.
Yes, I completely agree with that. There's another interesting parallel that I've found between, we'll say, the deep psychology stuff and your work. You have a massive emphasis on journaling. You talk about it an awful lot. It's one of the, you know, one of the key pillars of quitting porn and becoming a man that you admire, right? And you got to break down like what the hell is journaling precisely. And it's something like, okay, I don't understand precisely what's going on. I haven't articulated what's happened either over the course of the day or in a bad event that's happened. I'm going to put it onto a page and see if I can make sense of it. So that's like disentangling some kind of projection. So when I said earlier, you come across someone who you hate, the journaling aspect would just be a written down version of thinking to yourself, why do I hate this person? So it's an emphasis on truth, essentially. And then when you pull it apart, we've mentioned this before, that you'll come to realize, how did the relapse happen? You know, it's one of your steps, I believe. And it's like, okay, what does that mean? And it's something like, what specific projection was I putting onto the pornography? What happened in my life that led to that event? So in other words, you're not watching porn because it's porn. Like, porn addiction might even be an incorrect way to conceptualize it. I don't know. It's something like, I have a deep-seated issue. I have an imbalance in my soul, a poor communication between one side of me and another side of me, terminal and primal self, and I'm projecting it onto pornography. So one of them might be stress, and it's like, I'm incredibly stressed, therefore I lead to porn. But through the journaling process, which is an integration process, essentially just missing the action step, you're walking back and you're going, okay, I'm watching porn. Why? Well, it's because I'm really, really stressed. Why? Well, and then you come to the actual solution, and then hopefully you fix that. And then if you can't then go ahead past the relapse, it's then, oh, maybe there's another problem, and then you pull it apart, and then you pull it apart, and then you pull it apart. It's almost like a picture-perfect version of the individuation process. So when Jung talked about individuation, it was essentially a replacement myth in the face of the death of God. Not precisely because he still also believed in God, but it was good enough. It would give someone enough meaning. And basically what it says is, in the first half of your life, or so when you're a young man, up to about the age of 40, you're in your hero's journey phase. And what that means is you've been born, so you've come out of the unconscious, and now you have a desire to go and do something in the world. And that's fantastic. And that's absolutely fantastic. You need to differentiate yourself in the world. Men are driven by status, power, wealth, resources, women. That's your conquering, crusading stage. But then when you hit 40, the energy spontaneously changes, and the ego, you basically, decides that it wants to return to the unconscious. It wants to get more ethereal, more spiritual. But to do that properly, you have to basically go through a never-ending sequence. And it's literally never-ending, because we don't know what the end point is. Something like Jesus Christ. We actually don't know. You go through a never-ending series of internal journaling processes to go, why is this not going the way I want? What's this? What's this? What's this? What's the truth behind what's happening? And then through integrating that, you become better and stronger, and you can move on to another obstacle. That's what quitting porn is, I think. It's that constant pulling back from a projection. What's going on? Try again. Still didn't work. Pull back. But you have to do it sincerely, obviously. You have to actually want to get to the truth. And if you don't want to get to the truth, then maybe there's another deeper truth than that you need to fix. So
exactly,
you know, is why we say that, like, quitting porn is the rite of passage for the modern man. It has to be, because you can't be a modern man with an issue that deep, because there's too many things stopping you and capping you from being a man. Something like that. Exactly.
I mean, like, you know, we live in this modern world where, at least if you're, you know, in the Western civilized world, you have access to the internet, you're watching this, you're one of the richest people who's ever lived, ever. And like, there's more potential available to you than ever. But there are huge blocks in the way. And primarily, I would say that the big villain for the modern man, in a lot of ways, is the algorithm. It's the access of information that can just get a hook into your limbic system and then pull you down a path that is not beneficial to you. And so by learning how to quit porn, you learn how to defeat the algorithm on the deepest level possible. Yes. And it's the journaling process. Yeah, it's essential, because essentially what's happening is the two parts of your brain are teaming up, because they both have something that the other part needs. Your rational part, it needs power. You know, it's very, you know, if you're trying to do something purely on willpower alone, I mean, that battery runs dry really quick if your emotional mind doesn't want to go and do that thing. But your emotional mind, it needs clarity and direction, because without the rational stuff, it's stupid. And so, like, the journaling process is having them team up. It's like, all right, here is the energy that was present in this situation. what was that energy? And so by putting it into words, we're literally filtering it through our rational faculty. And that's the two parts combining. And then from there, you can have a conversation within yourself about, all right, well, what's the better way to handle this? And as you identify a better way to handle it, a fork in the road is created. Next time that you come to that similar situation, instead of having to create the right mode of action, you just have to remember it because you already identified it. And that memory will be automatically triggered if the journaling was done properly. And maybe it won't work. Maybe you still turn left when you should have turned right. Well, you journal again. It's like, no, now I am absolutely certain that turning left there leads to something bad. And so it's like the emotional mind, as far as I can tell, it's only managed by conditioning and instinct. And so you have to create new experiences. Journaling is one experience, and then screwing up is another experience. But if you never reflect on them, you never, like you said, integrate them, you never bring them to the realm of consciousness and plug them into your rational mind, then all of that energy is kind of wasted. So it's like, I'm right there with you. It's that this is the evolution of self. Is eventually, I believe, once you have your rational mind and emotional mind working in perfect harmony, that would be, I guess, like you say, that's Jesus. That's the ultimate being. But, probably as long as we are physically embodied, we're going to be having those kinds of struggles. But maybe not. I mean, who knows? I don't want to put limits on human beings, especially with now that we have a hive mind that we've never had before. And for the people who learn how to use, hive mind as an internet, the people who learn how to leverage the internet properly are going to actually be able to also evolve far more rapidly than we've ever done before, or devolve more rapidly than ever before. So I think we're at a weird tipping point, a weird kind of like that part of the graph where things go like exponential growth. I think that's where human beings are at right now. And we're going to soon see a divide between the people who take the upswing and the people who take the downswing. And this is going to become, I think, especially more evident as technology becomes even more integrated. And, like once we got the little computer chip in our brain that has constant images there, or, VR becomes huge. I mean, it's just, it's you're either going to go up or down. I don't think there's going to be too much in the middle unless it's an artificially created middle by those people who are programming the algorithm.
Yes. It's funny you bring up that Jesus thing again. That is technically sort of, although this is really simplifying what Jung was saying, that is what he thought Jesus was, more or less, sort of. So if once you go through, we'll say there are like 3 levels to your unconscious. You've got your shadow, basically, which is the things you don't like about yourself, and your real dark aspects, your capabilities and potentials which you're hiding from yourself, something like that. On your journey of becoming a more centered, grounded alpha Chad male, we'll say, you first integrate your shadow, then you come to fully integrate the anima. Rarely people reach a proper anima integration stage, and so we don't really know what it looks like. Once you've integrated the anima as a man, you reach the deepest archetype, which is called the self. The self, when people have psychedelic experiences, that they have intimations of God, they're breaching the self. So anything numinous that you cannot actually describe in words, to the point of being indistinguishable from God, even if you're a rabid atheist, you won't be able to come away from that experience and describe it in any other way than God. Doesn't mean that it is, it just might be. You breach the self, and the self is like this, it's like this meta-temporal region of all-knowing eternal peace. And when you have characters like the Buddha and Jesus going around, they speak an awful lot like that, as if they'd reached some kind of higher power. And that's what lots of people from the East like to do, in particular, more so than the West. I'm not quite sure what the Western tradition of meditation is like, what the magnitude of that is. But when you meditate, what happens? It's like, well, the seas of the unconscious is calmed. So we'll say the shadow and the anima and all of your problems in life, they calm. And then what's it like? It's like just this numinous, eternal nothingness, inner peace. It's what the people in the East are talking about, inner peace. I think it's in Kung Fu Panda. That's the whole mission of that, is inner peace, inner peace, inner peace. And that's what you're looking for. So, and that, to tie that into your work, I guess, you stress meditation an awful lot. You stress it in your course, and you go through precisely how you would go about doing this. And it's like, well, why? Maybe it's a promise. I mean, it sets you up, I suppose, to be in a grounded state through which you can deal with porn properly, deal with your emotions, primal mind properly. Then at the same time, it gives you an intimation of what might be possible. You know, it's like, this is the state I wish to remain in. You know, I want peace. I have a desire for peace. And that Jungian terms would be going through all that process and reaching the end boss, we'll say, which is the self.
Right, right. So it's interesting what's happened. As I went through, you know, I was making this course and, you know, I came up with all the centering exercises and things like that, and I was really starting to implement them and whatnot. There's been a profound shift in me because I discovered something. And I think, you know, it's touching, I don't know, some deeper level of integration that I've not gotten to before. But here's the way it works is that, and it's kind of weirdly different from, maybe it's agreeing, but it disagrees, at least on a surface level, with many of the Eastern philosophies that say that, you know, the solution to kind of like suffering is to learn how to be free from desire. And I've seen it almost go the opposite. And I would say that this is the more Western approach. The Western approach is the idea, I would say, that you actually don't turn desire down, you turn it up to absolute maximum. And so, like, when a guy and the reason I got into this is because, like, you know, I kept going into deeper. Like, why is it that, you know, you want to watch porn? Why is it that, you know, we feel these lusts? Why do we feel these desires, you know, for anything? And then we get this ache inside of us, the sensation of lack. Because this lack, this is the black hole. This is the dark side. This is the root of all of our evil, is a sensation of, if I don't do this thing, then I'm missing out something that I want. And if I don't have it, then I'm lacking. And we all hate that feeling. And what I realized, the way that you come to peace with that, or the thing that I've learned how to do through doing these centering exercises, is that it's kind of like an attitude shift toward that sense of lack. Instead of that lack being like, you know, I'm not good enough, or it's not good enough, or whatever, and viewing that as a bad thing, you view it as a good thing. Because as you see it as a good thing, what you see is that you are a being of pure and infinite hunger for goodness. And when you learn how to experience that sense of lack as that, it's actually, as far as I can tell, it's like, instead of a black hole, it becomes like a bright light inside of yourself. And you actually gain a sensation of peace from it, because it's like, wow, this is what I am at my being. I am this massive generator magnet of goodness, and I can relax into that. And there's a tremendous peace and fulfillment. And it's like you actually even almost feel it more in the times of struggle. And this was interesting to me because, you know, I'm a Catholic, and, you know, I've been raised Catholic, and one of the things they've said, or I've heard saints say, is that they are praying for some kind of suffering because it was in their suffering that they felt closest to God. I'm like, you guys are weird as shit. Why the hell would you ask for that? And now I'm starting to see, oh, okay, I'm not there. I'm not at the point of asking for suffering, not by a long shot, but I can see, if you continue to delve into that core of desire and you learn how to surrender to it more and more, and it's an abstract desire. It's learning how to want something bigger, learning how to say, yeah, maybe I want this woman, or maybe I want that ice cream cone, but what's the best thing? What's better than that? And what's better than that? And what's better than that? And as you continue to abstract your desires out and up, then you end up at like this ravenous hunger for heaven, for God. And if that's what's in your core at all times, well, then holy shit, that's something.
Yes, yeah, I can actually see both being true. I prefer your one though, and it's more masculine, I think, to prefer that one. You have a proper hierarchy set up. But if you can, what you've done, I think, is you've set up the ultimate death and rebirth hero's journey trial. You know, you've gone from, so say your unconscious is projecting onto porn its own little value hierarchy, and it's making you go towards it. Because, by the way, you can't not desire anything. It's like, try not eating. It's not going to happen. You might think you don't desire anything.
Yeah, the body demands that you will always desire something until you have no more body. Well, then you're going to have desire.
Yes, precisely. So the unconscious will project onto porn its own little value hierarchy, and so what you're suggesting is, throw that away and replace it with the biggest possible value hierarchy.
Right.
And the ultimate extent of that, you set up the ultimate hero's journey where you can't get beyond that, where you have to, and when you were saying like saints were praying for suffering, it's like, well, yeah, because what's a prerequisite for getting higher to God? You have to die first to get there. You have to go through, you know, how did Jesus get to heaven? When he died, it's like he went down to hell first and then went up to heaven. You know,
and I should mention
ad infernos, right? But that's not even in the Bible. That just came up afterwards. It's like, okay, that's interesting.
Right, and I should mention that the only way I got to this point of feeling this was because I continued to jump off the cliff over and over again. Like I kept, like, you know, like I said, I'm a spelunker. It's like, you know, all right, I was like, oh, here's a really big dark pit inside of myself. All right, here we go. And just just jump in and do it over and over again. And like it kept hurting and it kept sucking. But, you know, eventually I realized that you can actually relax into it. And that's what it is. And this is where I could see the synthesis with the Eastern perspective, is that by letting go of trying to let go of or like satisfy desire, by letting go of trying to satisfy desire, that's actually where you find peace. Meaning, like, you let your desire, when you are at peace with your infinite hunger and you accept your infinite hunger, that's actually a satisfaction of the hunger, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that like the sensations of desire go away. You just experience them without resistance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
no, that does make sense to me. It's like, well, what the Easterns are trying to do is basically obliterate their ego consciousness. They want to sort of... Now, I'm really not that familiar with different schools of meditation, so I know I'm going to get slated for this. Some of them, at the very least, if they want to achieve nothingness, then they want to obliterate everything. They want to return to the unconscious.
Sure.
And returning to God, basically, in mythological terms. You're doing the exact same thing, but you're doing it through a hero's journey type dynamic. So they are the same thing. Right. You're also looking for eternity and to peace. What I will stress, though, is I think you've got to make sure that the hierarchy you set up for yourself, your own heaven and hell, ultimate struggle, has to be based in truth. And it can't be, because take somebody like Marx or somebody like Hitler, and it's like, were they the ones who created their image of the kingdom of God? Because we all want a kingdom of God, and everyone intuitively knows what the hell that means. It's like you want a place, whether that be in space, time, or beyond space and time, where everything is set up in the most perfectly ordered fashion that serves the highest possible good. You've got to make sure that the good is switched on properly, you know, because otherwise that could be an incredibly dangerous thing. If you aren't in control of your fantasies, we'll say, then that can seriously limit what you think your highest possible good is. And it does make me sad to consider how many men have turned away from the highest possible good, the alchemical divine conjunctio between husband and wife, which is so denigrated these days because of the influence from pornography, shifting their hierarchy of value to be something else.
Right.
The level of pathology, it might extend insanely deep.
Right. And, you know, it's interesting you bring this up. It's like, yes, you have to ground it in the good and in the true. The challenge, though, is we often don't know what that is. And this is where I think kind of the missing link is for a lot of people. And it's a piece of wisdom that I think is under-leveraged today, which is the value of not knowing and learning how to enter into a state of being comfortable in the not knowing. Like there's a Christian, like you're talking about Christian meditation or whatever, or like what does that look like? Well, there's a book called The Cloud of the Unknowing, written by some kind of Christian monk. I don't know when it was from, but that's pretty much what it's about. His meditative practice is, you know, as you enter more and more into the unknown, as you let yourself like not know, enter into the things that you cannot consciously conceive, you're actually entering more and more into God, because the God is unknown to you. Yeah. And so it's like there's this weird balance, and this is where I can really see the yin and the yang, and you know the all the interesting psychological dualities that, you know, and models that people have here, is that like in this pursuit of personal evolution, it's like on one hand you need to have your foot, you know, centered in what you truly know. But if you do not, you know, this is a very Petersonian sort of thing to say, is like, if you do not also have a foot in the chaos and accept that you don't know, well, then, you know, you're going to end up like a Marx who thinks he has heaven and he's got the formula and he becomes so certain of it. And so that's why I think like the mark of someone that, like, I have a lot of trouble trusting people who are too certain of themselves, and they can't really back it up. You know, I try very hard to not make definitive statements about things unless I'm really pretty certain about it. And that's because I've been wrong so many times before. And it's like, if you create that margin for error, that's what really allows you to turn quickly. I think that's the key to, like, you know, this is humility. And I've said this before. It's like the lubricant of personal evolution is humility. And humility is saying, I don't know necessarily. And that's what allows, because it's when you're fully convinced, 100% certain, and you're actually wrong, that's when things go really off the rails, I think.
Yeah. Well, in Christian theology, you have humility contrasted against arrogance, and in Paradise Lost, arrogance is Satan, which is like, and you presumably don't want to be like Satan. In many ways, we all are, technically speaking, because our egos, have fallen so far from the unconscious. We don't understand the spiritual realm of our ancestors. We thought they were all complete and utter morons. It's like, I don't think so. When Isaac Newton believed in alchemy and astrology, it's like, you really think that he was just being an idiot? Or maybe you're missing something, or a worldview that he had that would put that into perspective, right? So yeah, humility would be absolutely huge in terms of going about doing this. You were saying that there's what was you saying that book was? The more you step into the or the more you step into the unknown, you're getting closer and closer to God. And it's like, maybe that's why the word faith is used, and maybe everyone can maybe everyone can adopt that word as their own, because again, the rational mind doesn't really like the word faith very much. It's like, well, you can set up your own hierarchy of good. And as you were saying, yes, you don't necessarily know what the highest good is either. But then also you're playing with the factor and the variable of time and other things happening. And it's not guaranteed to you. But the hypothesis throughout mythology, if you deem that to be somewhat related to truth, as in, is mythology an arbitrary story, or is it based in actual truths, like death and rebirth, right? Does there have to be a rebirth after a death? Because that's a faith dynamic. It's like, well, what if I step into hell and I don't get a rebirth? But the faith, which is implicit throughout Christian culture at the bottom of our civilization, is if you step off the cliff, Christ will not let you drown. And then you can translate that into a psychological rule. If you go down, something either in your unconscious or in your conscious will help you pull back up again, and that gives insane amounts of hope. Again, I keep trying to tie this into your work, I guess, because I enjoy it. Perhaps that's withdrawal symptoms. Maybe you begin your journey and you've been addicted for, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, however many times a day, and it's tearing you to pieces, and you begin on your journey and it's like, how do I know I'm ever going to be able to quit this? It's so painful right now, the withdrawal symptoms are tearing me apart. It's like, well, you can't get there if you don't have faith. That's a prerequisite. There's faith in the highest possible good, a better version of yourself, or Christ, we'll say, however you want to put it.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up faith. It's something I've thought about a lot. I do believe, like, there's a lot about the 12-step approach that I really don't like. I just actually don't think is useful, and I think is counterproductive. But their insistence on a higher power, what I see that as on a practical level when it works is the insistence that you have to believe in something you don't know for certain. Meaning, like, you have to believe that recovery is possible for you, that, like, you can do it. And you don't know that because you don't have the proof of that yet. And so, like, I feel like, yeah, that's an essential piece of the whole thing. And, like, on the other side of, the faith discussion is, like, I think the reason why I think faith is a dirty word is because many Christians, I would put this on the Christians, is that they confuse faith with knowing. They act like they know something that they just believe. And this is something that is initially what actually caused me to leave Christianity, was because it's like, you guys are talking to me like you know this, but you don't frickin' know this. Like, you can't prove it. But, like, what I see, it's the insecurity. It's the unwillingness to be in the unknown, which in my opinion means the unwillingness to be in the presence of God. If you're not in a mystery, then you're not anywhere near God. If you've got it all figured out, you're incredibly, you're in hell or you're getting pretty close to it. So that's why I think the problem is, but, like, true spirituality, it has to operate in this realm of kind of faith and unknown, because, otherwise you're dealing with the mundane.
Yeah. I mean, in the strictest possible sense, like, you can't move towards something without faith of it being there. You know, everyone has dreams of themselves. We all want to be greater than we are. You know, when we go to sleep at night or we wake up in the morning, we're alone. It's like, who could I be? Where am I lacking? And things like that. It's like a prerequisite for moving forward is faith. It's like this is something that the alchemists believed. So, and which is really weird, and the Gnostics. You had like God who lived at the North Pole, for example, which is strange. I don't know why he'd be there, but it's like a flat Earth with the North Pole at the center, and he was up there. And what comes from the North Pole? So, well, magnetism. It's magnetic north. So you can find your way to God through using a compass. So what they were doing, they may have been correct, we've no idea, God might live at the North Pole, is they were taking the spiritual metaphor of finding God and placing it into the material world of like, well, how, you know, magnetic north, it's like a magnet towards it. And it's like, you ain't going to be able to find God. And you know exactly what that means. You won't be able to find him unless you orient yourself properly, as Jordan Peterson says. Funny, uses the same magnetic language as the alchemist did.
Right.
But unless you have like a magnet that's going to get you there and a proper compass and faith that it's going to work and faith that that's actually at the other side, it ain't going to happen. And you have implicit faith that it's going to work whenever you act on something anyway. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. But when the challenge you set up for yourself is absolutely huge, it's like, unless you have faith that there's a hand in the darkness that's going to catch you, it's like, no wonder you aren't going to move forward and do it. No wonder that you get scared. And it's like, this is one of the reasons why religious belief is so powerful. You know, so I think it's St. Thomas Aquinas. He was being pushed by somebody, his sister or something like that. He was being really, really, really pushed to do something, and it was tearing his soul apart, and they tried to drag him out of the room. And what happened is 2 angels apparently came down to him and helped him and like beat the shit out these people and like threw them out of the room. And it's like, the lesson there is like, if you stick to what's true and what you truly believe in, even if it's going to get you torn to pieces, something is going to help you. It's like,
yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, like, to put it in just practical language, I would say that, you know, we were talking about that innate desire for goodness. I would say that's the compass, and I think that's the fundamental challenge people run into is trusting that, is believing that if I allow myself to really want the greatest possible goods, will that destroy me? Because I think that's what people are terrified of. If they really let their desire rise to infinity, to rise to heaven, and to hold that in their mortal, limited form, I think most people are terrified of that. And they feel they're going to burst into smithereens. And so what they do is they lower their desires and lower and lower and lower until all of a sudden they're only letting themselves desire the things in the gutter. And, you know, they just find themselves like eating mouthfuls of trash. But like, it's what you have to really do is you got to let that desire go and have faith that it's actually going to take you somewhere good. Let that magnetic desire smash into reality, and then continually, like, you're going to fall into pieces. Everything's going to fall into pieces. But then if you hold the desire, it's going to reshape again, and it's going to smash again. It's going to reshape a little bit better. It's going to smash again. It's going to reshape even better this time. And it's like, this is that journey toward, you know, the North Pole. That's what I think the alchemists were trying to get into. And, you know, when you recognize this and you own this process, the smashing apart, the thing that most people call bad, the thing people call lead, that's what ultimately then becomes gold. That's the transmutative process. That's what, you know, I try to teach in the Reforged Man, is like, yeah, you can learn how to take this stuff and turn it towards your benefit when you step into the story of, you know, how this all kind of flows. Yes.
I think it was in a Vanguard Daily recently, you actually mentioned the phrase turning lead into gold. And immediately my brain goes, oh, another parallel. Because the lead into gold idea is the philosopher's stone idea, which is something that gives eternal life. It's like, well, what the hell is that? Jung believed that was a reflection of Jesus Christ, essentially. What the psychological processes were going on. They were looking for Jesus, looking for God in the fallen world, because they were stuck down here. But yeah, you were saying that when you search for the highest possible good, it's going to tear you to pieces. And that's kind of a funny thing to get your head around. It's like, well, why? Surely it would be lovely to get up there. It's like, well, as we've already established, the stairway to heaven isn't from earth to heaven. You have to go down into hell first to get up to heaven. And so what does the biggest possible transformation look like? You've got to die 1,000 deaths, and it's going to be painful, and you've got to burn all of it off. Right. Like in Dante's Inferno, how does he get to heaven? He begins his story by he comes up against a hill, and he looks up the hill, and he's like, there's heaven. I'm going to go to heaven because it's easy. And he goes up and realizes that all of his sin or potential sin is stopping him. And that drives him all the way down into hell. And he's got to go all the way down first, down to where Satan is, confront all of his darkness and potential darkness. But then once he gets past Satan, there's a ladder, and the ladder goes all the way back up to heaven. It's like, that's the story you have to go through. If you want to be the man that you want to be, you have to sacrifice something. You have to go to hell first, and that requires the painful shedding off of the part of you which is addicted to porn in your particular instance.
Right. And like, here's my theory on Satan, like, at least as a metaphorical thing, not as an entity, is that what he is the status hierarchy divorced from dignity. Basically, like, you know, mythologically, he was the most powerful, the most beautiful, basically the highest status being in existence, literal existence, right? You know, Jesus didn't exist yet or whatever. And like, you know, he's the ultimate ego. And it wasn't actually incorrect. He was the best, most beautiful, whatever. But then he found out, all right, this little lowly Jew was going to be actually higher than him. And that disrupted his perception of the status hierarchy. And the only way that you can make sense of that is through this lens of dignity, of inherent worth. And so, like, it's like you had, like, all of our shit that we deal with, all of the pain and everything like that, it's all, you can put all of it in the realm of a status insecurity or a status conflict. And it's only then when you go down into the depths of that status conflict, whether it's like, you know, a status lack of, you know, sexual status or financial status or social status or whatever it is that's causing you pain, familial status, moral status, like literally everything can be viewed as, you know, good, bad, that sort of thing. And like when you get down into there and you recognize that you are not any better or not any worse, and both sides of that statement are hard, because like, you're not any better if you earn all this money or you follow these moral codes or whatever. You're not any better than anyone else, but you're also not any worse. And it's like, from that point, that's when you're really free to know your worth. And that's what frees you from the clutches of Satan. That's what, you know, the whole kind of Christian story is that, yeah, you're a sinner, but you also have the possibility of being a saint. But regardless of where you're at in that process, God still loves you unconditionally. And that's the kingdom of heaven, is when you can connect to your dignity, you've entered into the kingdom of heaven. And that frees you then from the world, which operates purely on status. That's what moves the world, is status. And so it's like, that's why Satan is the prince of this world, because he is the prince of status. And so that's how you get out of that. That, my opinion, is going through the hell, is confronting all your status insecurity, finding your dignity at the bottom, and that's what frees you to then enter the kingdom of God. That's yes.
Yeah, no, yes. And I like this. Technically, we're not making any sense right now because it's just mythological fluff, but it still makes sense, which I
think it makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, it still makes sense on like an intuitive level. It's kind of strange like that. So in the book of Revelation, I think the image of heaven, or the kingdom of heaven people got, was the city of Jerusalem made out of jewels and crystals and stuff. It's an ordered place, and there's a promise that you can go live there. Whereas in Milton's Paradise Lost, where Satan lived, was literally called pandemonium. I don't know if that's where the word pandemonium came from, probably. But basically, and what does that imply? It's like, well, they're both structures of being, we'll say. They're both hierarchies, but one of them is ordered with a promise of something beautiful, and that's because it's run by someone other than you. You have to be humble enough to have enough dignity to get in there. You don't just get there by default. You have to play by the rules of the game to get there. And therefore it's stable across time. And maybe that's what eternal life means. Everything remains stable across time. I don't know, probably one of the 50 different things that it means. Whereas the hell one is pandemonium. And it's like, well, there is no proper hierarchy there because it's tearing itself to pieces. It's like, yes, Satan's in charge, but he's not being a very good boss. Because
well, it's just power. That's all it is. Right.
Yes.
All it is power. Whatever is most powerful is what reigns. And, you know, with dignity means that everything actually has a place and an order. To reject dignity is to say that there is no value in the way anything's put together. It's just forces smashing into each other, and the strongest force is the one that moves. And so, yeah, of course, that leads to pandemonium.
Yeah, it's the arrogance of the ego to think, arrogance of you. When I say ego, I just mean conscious you.
Sure.
The arrogance of that thinking that you're in control. But whether you like it or not, you have to bend the knee to something. And if you want proof of that, by the way, have a psychedelic trip and try and deny Christ. That one of my friends, he was a bit naughty, and he recently did some naughty substances, we'll say. And he came back from his trip, and he was like, yeah, dude, I really want to get somebody to go on a psychedelic trip of heaven and hell, whatever that means in reality, I have no idea, and then deny Christ, so deny a higher power. The person who does that is Satan. They think they're the one in control, but it's a delusion because they're not. You have to play by the rules. And perhaps pulling away from the old porn topic here, but to like pull it back, it's like you need to recognize you're not the one in control. You in your current form goes back to what we were saying at the very beginning. Like, you're not the one who wants to watch pornography. You think you are. You think you're in control. All that exists is me, but it's not. There are other forces. Not only the demonic anima succubus who wants to suck away your heroic life force, but the promise of on the horizon when you conquer that demon on your hero's journey, the promise, that's also what's going to be in control, because that's the thing that's pulling you towards it. Maybe it's not you who wants it. Maybe it's what wants you. And you just have to make a choice between the good demon, or the good angel even, on one shoulder, and the bad demon on the other. You don't get to decide for yourself. It's the will of the good or the will of the bad, and that's something that's outside of yourself. And the only way to get there seems to be humility.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like I've thought about free will a decent amount, and like I feel like it exists. Like, obviously I believe free will exists, but I don't think it's like the way that most people think it exists. Like, it's not like you really have free will over everything you do. You have basically, I think free will is binary. It's like you either point yourself toward good or you don't do anything. And like, if you don't do anything, then you are then a victim to entropy and the forces that are.
You could also point yourself towards the bad as well, and some people do that when you really want to inflict pain on somebody, and,
sure.
That's the forces of evil pulling you, because some people can really enjoy inflicting pain on other people. It's horrendous to even consider.
Sure. I mean, yeah, and it all gets complicated too, because I think some people who even are in the acts of inflicting pain, they're actually confused and they think they're doing good, and it's like, you know, I believe that everyone can go on a journey, and sometimes your journey is going to have very weird legs to that journey, where you think you're doing something so good, but it's so actually screwed up. You're just, you know, you're just on the path. But I do believe that there is evil in this world, and we can know what it is. Sometimes it takes a little bit of doing and a little bit of conversation, maybe a lot of fighting to figure out exactly what that definition is. But like, you know, what's the alternative? The alternative then is to say that there is no good, there is no evil, and that, I don't know, that just seems horribly depressing to me, because then there's nothing.
Yeah, and that's complete and utter nonsense. It's like you have these hierarchies in your head of good and of bad, and what gets you to the good, the more spiritual, harmonious place, that's good, right? I mean, I don't know quite how strict, perhaps Aquinas type Catholic you are, but there's actually a bit of a problem that Jung, saying on topic, I guess, had with the Catholic Church. Is it was like, you boys have got it right, like psychologically at the very least, because I can't say anymore, I'm a physician, I'll get chucked out of places. You've got it right, except for one key thing, where the Catholics for the longest time emphasized that there was no evil, that it was good, and then there's good, and then lack of being close to God is what's evil. But then what seems to have happened spontaneously in Milton, the guy who wrote Paradise Lost, his psyche, where he was like, nope, bump, and he sort of threw Satan back up to the top again. And if you don't recognize that there's another force that's pulling you away, if it's just lack of God, you know, so you have two situations. Either I'm not doing what I want to do because I lack Christ, we'll say, or I'm not doing what I want to do because I've got too much Satan. That actually gives you an adversary to contend with, rather than just being a bit lost and trying to claw your way back to God. Psychologically, I think that gives you a bit of a shift, because it also appeals to like masculine tendencies to want to fight. It's like the evil demon is coming for my boyo juice, we'll say, my vitality. I want to fight you, right? Right.
Well, I mean, the Catholic Church is long. I didn't know that I don't know if they ever moved away from the idea of no Satan. I mean, I know they define often Satan as like Satan can't create anything. All he can do is pervert what is already good. And so that's, I think, maybe the idea there. But this is again, it's like I said, you know, the second highest mentality is one of relationship. I think the highest mentality is one of game. And the way I view just this existence, like we're going to put it in a metaphorical lens, is that, you know, Satan said, I think the game we're playing here sucks. I think your idea of Jesus and humans, dumb. And God says, I disagree. I think it's awesome. And Satan says, well, I bet you this. And then basically it's like, that's what humanity is. It's a game between, and God just like, he created us because he wanted someone to play with. And we can play the game, and we can play that game all out. And when you're fully immersed in the game mentality, it means that you are 100% engaged in doing what you believe is good, but you're 100% detached from the outcome. That's when you're playing. And I think that that's the highest spiritual lens. I think that people who are really operating on that place, they always have a twinkle in their eye. Yes, they take things very seriously. Yes, they're fighting tooth and nail against, you know, the evil as they perceive it in the world. But they also recognize that it's a big drama, and we all can play a part in it. And I think that you can only really reach that point is if you really confront your own mortality, if you recognize that, yeah, maybe you will die and be nothing, or, you know, you have a firm enough faith and you accept that, or you have a firm enough faith that, you know, you're never going to go anywhere. Your, you know, soul's immortal and everything's going to end up okay because you're serving the good. Either way, I think that's how you access it, and that's how I see it at the highest level. It's a big game.
Yeah. Yeah, there are loads of things I could potentially say, but I won't, to avoid, I guess, boring the listeners or complicating things. But just an interesting point to consider, perhaps, is I mentioned that schema at the beginning where we're atoms and we're also cells. Two different. Like, you can't say one doesn't exist, and we're also people.
Right.
Are there other levels above that which maybe we can't access, or they're like numbers where they're still real, but they don't exist in the material world? In which case, what does that look like? Well, one way, Jordan Peterson would say order and chaos, right? And one way of looking at it is the domain of Christ and Satan battling it out in your soul. And we're independent agents where we can choose what to do. So, because you could approach, say, watching pornography as, I am going to be a biological organism and I'm going to fulfill my sexual desire, perhaps in a suboptimal manner, but I will engage in this and nothing will happen, which presupposes that there is no spiritual plane or ethereal plane on which sexuality can manifest. It presupposes that the only point of sexuality is to breed in a Darwinian manner in this material fallen world. Maybe there's another point to sexuality too that we don't see with our eyes or hear with our ears because it's an intuitive projection from the metaphorical narrative mythological layer to reality. It's like, is there a logos to your libido? Are there things that you should do? How come priests are emphasized to go chaste? Is that a control mechanism by the church? Don't think so, because it also happens in warrior cults across the world. It fuels them with something. They get connected, plugged into life. And if you get priests, for example, to start being sexually active, then the image of God just dissipates from their minds, and it's just way difficult to be connected. So the way we interact with that mythological layer of good and evil, in particular with sexuality, because it's huge, something I'm fascinated by, because it's, I think, evidence that there is something more beyond this realm. And I'm not saying an afterlife, I'm saying an actual, it's so difficult to say.
No, I know what you're saying.
An actual layer to reality through which our actions and everything that we do matters, and we're conscious agents in how that happens. It's not a nihilistic world. There is a good and an evil, and that's cool, dude. It's also good at parties to talk like that as well. Yeah,
no, I'm on the same wavelength, and obviously it's all thinking, conjecture, whatever. But I think that the reductionist view of reality that just wants to take it down, it's like all we are just cells bouncing around. All we are is atoms. Like, yeah, you could go that way, but that's a shitty way to live. What a terrible story. What if we went the opposite way and we kept building bigger and bigger? And that's where things, I think, get really interesting. And you look at yourself as in this bigger movement of forces, like you said, the archetypal realm smashing against each other, while also being very much the physical realm. And this is something that, ironically, occultism has done, is they've created a materialistic, they call it I think naturalist occultism, where it's like they describe occultism and ceremonial magic through purely a rational materialist lens. And it makes sense. And I think that this, in some ways, we need this for Christianity. And I think Peterson has started to do a decent job of popularizing these ideas. And I'm not saying that that's where the conversation needs to end. It's just that then begins the dialogue for how it integrates into these other layers. So it's like you can see how Christianity works on the atom level, why it's a good strategy. You see it like there's probably stuff written about this in the atheistic Christians. I know there's some atheist Christians who, like it's like they are, but they aren't. I think they might actually be a little bit ahead of the curve. And so that line of thinking, when you can accept things on the practical layer, that then I think gives the mind comfort to start entering into a new layer of the unknown of like, well, okay, so what does this mean? And you can start building up this higher perception that we're talking about. But yes. Yeah, I think that's enough for today. I think we've covered about 1 million different topics. This was really fun. I hope you've enjoyed yourself, because I know I have.
Yes. It's always good fun to talk about stuff like this, especially with you as well, because you resonate on the same wavelength as well. And I've been watching your stuff since I was like 2 years old, dude. I don't know how old I was. So it's very cool to speak with you like this and actually, engage as an adult man instead of just, as I say, a 2-year-old.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to have you on here. Thank you. This was fun, and hopefully all you guys out there listening, you got a lot out of this. Give us, if you want to hear us talk again, give us some feedback. If you want to have us address anything that we said in here. I know there's a lot of statements and stuff that we threw out and started that we didn't really get to expound upon. So if anything sounded fishy to you or anything like that, let us know. Because this is the fun stuff. I want to be making sure that we're doing more kinds of wide-ranging talks and topics here on Universal Man, because I think there's so much more to being the best man you can be beyond just quitting porn. That's just, like I said, that's just a mechanism that starts unlocking so much more. So yeah, guys, James, you want to tell anyone where they can find you or anything you got going on?
Well, there are two main ways they can find me. The first one is to be in your Vanguard, because I'm a member of your Discord. So you can always reach out. Don't be shy now. Come hang out with me, which would be very nice to get to know you, of course. And the other way, probably the best thing to do is for you to drop a link in the description towards the Boyo podcast. So I run a podcast on YouTube. We go live every Saturday it's about 10 in the morning English time, and it's been consistently like that for months. And what we're doing is we're covering essentially what we were talking about today. We've just finished going through Carl Jung's Ion as a book, and there are potential new projects just opening up on the horizon, some maybe even scarier, which I'm looking forward to. But it'd be good to have you along for the ride. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. We'll definitely check that out. And then obviously James is going to be a big part of Universal Man here. So yeah, you'll be seeing more of us. And if you got anyone else you want to see me talk to, you think that'd be interesting to have on this thing, then let me know. But I think that's it for now. Stay sharp, everyone. Hey, if you found this episode useful and you want to hear more, make sure you like, subscribe, and if you're tuning in on YouTube, make sure you hit that bell button to turn on notifications. But if you really like this content and you would like to join the tribe of Universal Men, then you need to head on over to the Universal Man Patreon page by clicking the link in the description. We call ourselves the Vanguard because we are committed to living on the front lines of life. By joining, you'll gain access to exclusive content, weekly accountability, community chat rooms, and live calls. Also, by joining the Vanguard, you become a part of my inner circle. Therefore, you get my prioritized attention. Most importantly, though, you'll be joining a crew of like-minded guys that can help support and inspire you on your journey of masculine self-mastery. So click the link below and sign up today.